Good day, class. So today we'll be talking about how the brain works. Now, specifically, we'll be talking about the central nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is that part of the nervous system that consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Now, we will be having a separate topic regarding this, okay, but let me just give you a few introductions now. So the central nervous system is one of the two major divisions of the nervous system. Now, the other one is the peripheral nervous system, which consists of the somatic and then the autonomic nervous system. Now, if you can remember human anatomy, somatic nervous system is the one responsible for voluntary movements, while the autonomic nervous system is responsible for the involuntary movements. Right? So now the peripheral nervous system connects the central nervous system to sensory organs such as the eye and the ear. The other organs of the body, such as the muscles and blood vessels, are also connected to the peripheral nervous system. Now, for our lesson for today, okay, let's concentrate more on the brain, specifically on how the brain communicates throughout our body. Now, the brain produces substances known as neurotransmitters. Now, these are chemical signals that are passed down through the spinal cord and into targeted organs like, say, for example, the heart, which controls the rhythm of the heartbeat, okay, and how much blood flows throughout the body. Now, next one could be neurotransmitters are passed down from the brain to the stomach, which of course manages or supervises the digestion, and then probably from the brain down to the lungs, okay, to control breathing. Now next, let's zoom into our brain and see what's happening inside. Now, inside our brain, okay, there are many cells known as neurons here. Now, the main functional unit of the brain are the neurons. Now, there are millions of neurons in the brain, all talking together in perfect sync by passing down signals, which is what we've said, which we all know as the neurotransmitter, from one neuron to another. Now, this time, let's talk about the neuron itself. Now, each neuron is composed of a dendrite, a cell body, or also known as the nucleus, okay, an axon, which allows the travel of action potentials, and then lastly, we have the nerve terminal. So the next question is, how do neurons work? Now let's have here a scenario. Okay, say for example, you cut your finger with a knife. Now we all know it's very painful, okay, because we have nerve endings everywhere in our body. Now, the sensory nerves in your finger, specifically the pain receptors, will start to produce neurotransmitters known as substance P, and these neurotransmitters will travel along the nerves, okay, going into our dendrites. Now, when the dendrites receive these electrical signals from the pain receptors, okay, it will be passed down to the nucleus of the cell for interpretation. Now, the nucleus integrates incoming signals and interprets them. Now, they generate this outgoing signal, which is also known as the action potential, to be passed down along the axon. Now, once this action potential reaches the nerve terminal, okay, the nerve terminal will now create neurotransmitters based on the interpretation given by the nucleus. So, in Tagalog, okay, allow me to speak in Tagalog, once the dendrites, okay, naka-receive siya ng chemical signals, or say for example, yung substance P, from the pain receptors, ipapasa niya yun sa nucleus ng neuron natin. Now, si neuron, ang magiging trabaho niya is, it will try to interpret it, okay? So, isip niya, para saan ba ang chemical signal na to? At pag na-interpret niya na to, ipapasa niya yung mensahe na yon from the nucleus down to the nerve terminal by passing through the axon. Now, syempre, pag dumating na yung impulse na yun, yung action potential, yung interpretation ng nucleus hanggang nerve terminal, si nerve terminal naman magpapalabas ng neurotransmitters based sa interpretation ni nucleus. Okay? So, let's proceed. So, these neurotransmitters will then be passed on to other neurons, okay, to other neurons for their own interpretation. Okay. So now, this time naman, let's focus on how the axon pushes the electrical signals produced by the nucleus down to the nerve terminal. Now, to do that, let's zoom in to the axon. Okay, so medyo complicated ang topic na to. So I want you guys to try to understand this. Okay, pag hindi naintindihan, pwede naman i-rewind. Okay. So now, the axon is mainly covered with myelin sheaths. Now, myelin sheaths are fatty acids, which is responsible for lubricating, okay, the signal transduction process. So, in Tagalog, okay, yung myelin sheaths natin, ang main purpose nito is para lang mapadulas yung pagpasa ng mensahe from the nucleus down to the nerve terminal. Okay, now, next. let's put an imaginary line along our axon. Okay, now within the membrane of the axon, voltage-operated channels are lined up here. So namely, we have the sodium channels, okay, we have the potassium channels in orange, sodium channels are in blue, and then we have next is the sodium-potassium pump. Okay, sorry, sodium-potassium pump. Okay, the one in blue and orange. Okay, looks. Now, as you all know, outside the cell, we have sodium ions. Okay, while on the inside of the cell, we have potassium ions. Now, if you've noticed so far, okay, there are more positive ions outside the cell rather than on the inside, which makes, okay, so it's more positive on the outside, while on the inside, konti lang yung positive ions, so which makes the charge of the axon relatively negative. Okay, now this negative charge is what we know as the resting membrane potential. Now, the average resting membrane potential is about negative 70 millivolts. Okay. Now, when the nucleus of the axon, of the neuron starts to interpret the signal it received from the dendrite, okay, it creates an electrical signal and passes it down into the axon. Now, when this electrical signal touches the sodium channels, as you've seen a while ago, okay, it causes them to open, allowing the influx of sodium ions into the cell. Now, once na pumasok yung sodium ions into the cell, it makes the charge of the cell positive. Now, since it's already positive, this change in the potential of the axon causes movement, or this one is known as depolarization, and it causes the movement of the electrical signal forward. Okay? Now, since there is a shift in the membrane potential, the nearby sodium channels, okay, will also open, allowing the movement of the axon, allowing the movement of the sodium ions again into the cell, making the cell charge more positive once again. So dahil naging positive ulit yan, okay, it will drive the electrical signal forward ulit. Okay? Now, the movement of the electrical signal forward along the axon causes this time naman the potassium channels to open. Now, this time, causing the efflux of potassium ions. Now, this movement of potassium out of the axon causes the charge to go back to negative. Okay? So, a while ago, napapansin niyo, so konting recap lang. So, a while ago, nakita niyo, ang electrical signal natin na galing sa nucleus, dumaan sa axon. Now, as it passes down into the axon, it triggers the sodium channels to open. Now, please take note, class, whenever the sodium channels open, it only allows the influx of sodium. So, nagpapapasok lang siya ng sodium, pero hindi siya nagpapalabas. So, now, dahil nagbukas ang sodium channels natin, okay, pumasok lahat ng sodium, making the charge of the axon relatively positive sa area na yon. Okay, so dahil positive siya, okay, na-push yung electrical impulse na pinroduce from the nucleus forward. Alright? So, nakita niyo kanina. Kaya naging positive tuloy ang charge ng cell natin. Now, whenever the sodium channels open, we call this depolarization. Now, same thing will happen to other segments of the axon. So, kanina napansin nyo, dahil nag-move forward ang electrical signal, okay, it forces the sodium channels in that area to open, once again, allowing the entry of sodium into the cell, making it positive again, moving the electrical impulse forward. Now, habang pumapasok or dumidiretso or nag-move forward yung electrical signals, notice nyo kanina yung potassium channels natin, okay, it started to open, causing the efflux of potassium ions. Now, when we say efflux, ibig sabihin, from inside going outside. Yun lang kasi ang ginagawa ng potassium channels. Okay, once they are activated, they only cause the efflux of potassium ions, causing now potassium ions to leave the cell. Now, once na nag-leave sila, okay, nagbabawasan ng positive charge ng cell, making it more negative. So, as you've seen, in the area number 1, okay, sa first segment ng ating axon, naging negative yung charge niya. Now, this process is known as hyperpolarization. Okay, now, if you've noticed, potassium ions are now outside of the axon, and sodium ions are the ones inside the cell. Now, as we've said a while ago, class, okay, normally, asan dapat ang sodium? Nasa labas. Si potassium naman, nasa loob. Okay, kaya nga ang mnemonics natin would be piso. Potassium in, sodium out. Now, if you notice this time, there is a sudden change. Ang nasa labas, si potassium, ang nasa loob, si sodium. So, is that right? Okay, so sabi natin, this is not normal. Now, this time, okay, now this is where the sodium-potassium pump plays its role. Now, it drives 3 molecules of sodium out of the axon while returning only 2 potassium ions back into the cell. Now, by returning only 2 potassium ions into the cell, this maintains the negative charge of the axon, keeping it relaxed. Now, this process is known as repolarization. Okay? So now, the entire process will proceed all throughout the axon until the electrical signal or action potential moves forward and ultimately reaches the nerve terminal. Meaning, the action potential will travel along the axon through a series of opening and closing of voltage-operated channels. So, continuously, magbubukas ang sodium, okay, allowing influx of sodium. Okay, magbubukas si potassium, allowing potassium to leave. And then, sodium-potassium pump will return the charge back to normal. Okay, so if we zoom out again, this is what happens. So the dendrites of the neurons will receive the neurotransmitter or an electrical signal somewhere, okay, and pass it down to the nucleus for interpretation. Now, after integration, the nucleus will produce an action potential, then push it down to the axon until it reaches the nerve terminal. Once it's down the nerve terminal, it will cause the release of another neurotransmitter to be received by the dendrites of another neuron. And the same process will repeat itself over and over again. Now, multiply all of these processes to 1,000,000 neurons. So, just imagine, ang daming nangyayari sa loob ng utak natin. Okay? So, I hope we're good so far. So, now we're done with the axon. Next thing we need to discuss is what's happening here. Okay? Between the nerve terminal and the dendrite. Okie dokie. So, let's maximize this one. Okay, so if you notice, yung orange na structure na to is the dendrite. Okay, while the Y shape would be, sorry, let me repeat. Okay, the orange structure here is the nerve terminal, while the Y shape or parang letter V dito would be the dendrite of a receiving neuron. Now, let's call this the presynapse. Okay, and this one known as the postsynapse. Okay, the gap between the postsynapse and the presynapse is known as the synapse. Now, within the postsynapse, okay, we have here receptors. Okay, and on the presynapse naman, okay, we have here structures known as vesicles containing, okay, these little structures. Hulaan nyo kung ano yan. Those are neurotransmitters. Okay? So now, what happens when an action potential is produced, okay, and goes down to the nerve terminal? Now, once the action potential passes through the nerve terminal, okay, the vesicles will release the neurotransmitters. Okay, so pero depende muna to sa interpretation ni nucleus. Okay, so once the action potential reaches the nerve terminal, it causes the vesicles to release the neurotransmitters into the synapse. Now, ano ang gagawin ng mga neurotransmitters na to? Of course, they will try to find their pair. Okay, so one neurotransmitter for one receptor. Okay, so once a neurotransmitter binds to its receptor, its corresponding receptors, it causes the production of, again, another action potential. Na ipapasa to sa nucleus for interpretation. The nucleus will interpret it, pass the signal down to the axon and to the nerve terminal, and then down to the nerve terminal, magpaproduce ulit siya ng neurotransmitter. So this process happens over and over again. And please take note, it only happens in a mere split seconds. Okay. Now, next one. How are neurotransmitters terminated? Now, neurotransmitters cannot continuously stimulate receptors. It has to end sooner or later. Sabi nga natin, walang forever. So, this is where an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, okay, or also known as MAO, and another one which is known as the catechol O-methyltransferase, COMT, comes into play. Now, these enzymes are designed to metabolize and inactivate monoamines. Now, this stops the stimulation of the receptors, causing the termination in the production of action potentials. Okay? Now, the next process would be recycling. Okay? Wherein some of the neurotransmitters are recycled back into the presynapse, okay, going into their vesicles, and then the rest will just diffuse and degrade outside the synapse, leaving the receptors completely vacant, waiting for another stimulation. Okay? So, I hope you got that, class. Okay. Now, this time naman, let's talk about the monoamines. Okay, so as we've said, or as you know, monoamines are examples of neurotransmitters. So they are basically metabolized by the MAO enzyme. And we have three here, the norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Now, norepinephrine is mostly coming from excitatory neurotransmitters, excitatory neurons. in the brain. Okay, so its main responsibility is to excite our neurons, so which causes depolarization. Same goes with dopamine. Now, please take note, serotonin, also known as 5-hydroxytryptophan, okay, is released naman, on the other hand, from inhibitory neurons. Okay, now let's discuss naman the monoamines this time. So if you notice, class, monoamines are very important in regulating our cognitive function, mood, and emotion. So they play a vital role in this. Now, we have here noradrenaline, serotonin, and dopamine. Just so you know, class, noradrenaline is also known as norepinephrine. Now, noradrenaline is responsible for ergotropic vigilance, or kumbaga more on energy spending siya. So say for example, okay, nalaman yung biglang may quiz tayo ngayon. Okay? E di syempre, bigla kang ma-excite. Oh my God, hindi ako nag-aral. Okay? So kapag pag naramdaman mo yung kabang iyon, ibig sabihin nun, masyadong mataas ngayon ang noradrenaline mo. So which gives you energy. Kaya tuloy, ang bilis nyo biglang mag-aral. Okay? Now, next one is serotonin. Serotonin, on the other hand naman, causes tropotrophic impulse, meaning energy conserving. So whenever we sleep, say for example, or any activity that causes us to conserve energy, now that is mainly serotonin talking to us. Now, lastly is the dopamine. Okay, dopamine naman, on the other hand, is responsible for the pleasure drive. So, halimbawa, dumaan ang crush mo. Pagkadaan niya, bigyan sa'yo mo, oh my God, ang ganda-ganda naman niya, or ang pogi-pogi niya naman. Okay, that feeling of pleasure, okay, is the responsibility of dopamine. Now, not all the time, iisang neurotransmitter lang ang mataas sa utak natin. Minsan, nagsasama-sama sila. So, halimbawa, pag nagsama si noradrenaline at si dopamine, okay, that gives you motivation. Meaning, it gives you the pleasure to do something and the energy to do it. Okay? What about serotonin and dopamine? Paano kung bigla silang tumaas? So again, dopamine is responsible for pleasure drive, while on the other hand, serotonin gives you energy or conserves energy. So once they combine, okay, I'm not sure about this remaining two, yung sex and aggression, okay, but it creates appetite. So, ano ba nangyayari during appetite? Okay, di ba ang sarap kumain, at the same time, you are conserving energy. Okay? So, lastly, would be the combination of noradrenaline and serotonin naman. So, alam niyo naman, noradrenaline expands energy, serotonin conserves energy. So, sadyang opposite ang dalawang neurotransmitter na to. So, dahil sila ay magka-opposite, so pagsabay silang lumabas, sabog, which causes anxiety and irritability. So, that's the reason why, girls, next time, halimbawa, galit kayo sa boyfriend niyo, instead sabihin niyo, galit ako sa iyo. Kaya sabihin niyo, wag niyo akong kausapin, wag mo akong kausapin. Mataas ang noradrenaline at serotonin ko. Okay, so pwede yun. So, ibig sabihin, you are irritable and or anxious. Okay? Okay, so for our next topic, let's talk about the biosynthesis and metabolism of dopamine. Actually, the diagram says it all. Okay, ang gusto ko lang mapansin niyo dito, class, is that dopamine comes from tyrosine. Now, tyrosine can come from food products. Say, for example, pwede siya manggaling sa beer, sa cheese, meat, or any tyrosine-containing foods, or tyramine-containing foods, tyrosine. Okay? So, basically, ang ating dopamine nanggaling sa tyrosine. Now, dopamine, once metabolized, okay, so yan ang biosynthesis. Now, dopamine, once metabolized, okay, can be metabolized by either two enzymes. So, we have the MAO and then the COMT. MAO, monoamine oxidase, and then we have COMT, catechol O methyltransferase. Now, either way, okay, once dopamine is metabolized, it's going to produce a final product known as homovanillic acid. Now, what about for the biosynthesis and metabolism of norepinephrine? Okay, if you notice, class, si norepinephrine nanggaling kay dopamine. Na si dopamine nanggaling sa tyrosine. Okay, so meaning, the precursor agent for norepinephrine and dopamine is the same. Okay? Now, once dopamine is processed by dopamine beta hydroxylase, it creates now norepinephrine. Now, norepinephrine was once processed by this enzyme. Okay? Nakikita niyo na yan? Okay? Yun na yan. Okay? It creates naman epinephrine. Now, you might be wondering, sir, what's the difference between norepinephrine and epinephrine? Norepinephrine, yun yung makikita natin sa ating neurons, sympathetic nerves. Okay? While epinephrine is something that you can find in the adrenal medulla. Okay? In short, norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter. Please take note of this. Okay, it's a neurotransmitter. While on the other hand, epinephrine is a hormone. So, maliwanag ba tayo doon? Okay. Now, how do we metabolize norepinephrine? So, its main pathway for metabolism is mainly due to the enzyme monoamine oxidase. which creates the final product, 3-methoxy-4-hydroxy mandelic acid. Okay? So now, for the neurotransmitter, for other neurotransmitters, so hindi lang naman monoamines ang neurotransmitters natin. So marami pang iba. So we have here GABA, and then we have here glutamate. GABA, also known as the gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is the major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the body. So this neurotransmitter causes the influx of chlorine into the cell. Okay, yun yung trabaho niya. So alam naman natin, pag pumasok si chlorine, papasok ng cell, it makes the cell more negative. At pag naging negative siya, it causes hyperpolarization, meaning the cell becomes inhibited. Now, the next one is the glutamate or the EAA, excitatory amino acid. Okay, the glutamate naman, on the other hand, is the major excitatory neurotransmitter. So it is thought to be important in learning, memory, and other brain functions. Kaya if you've ever heard of glutaphos, okay, yung brain enhancer na yun, the main ingredient of glutaphos kasi is glutamate. Now, on the other hand, okay, glutamate causes naman the influx of sodium ions, okay, causing excitation. So GABA causes influx of chlorine. Glutamate, on the other hand, causes the influx of sodium. Okay, so other neurotransmitters we have the opioids. Opioids are mainly used for suppression of pain. Okay, so you have your endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins. Now, these are what we call the endogenous opioid. When we say endogenous, these are the opioids produced inside our body. Kasi kung exogenous source naman, we have morphine. So in times of stress and pain, endogenous peptides act at the opiate receptors to relieve pain. So other neuropeptides, we have substance P. You've heard about this. Okay, I mentioned this a while ago. It's responsible for pain. So isa sa mga kumukontra sa substance P would be the opioids. And then lastly, we have the vasoactive intestinal peptides, which is a neurotransmitter causing vasodilation. Okay? So pretty much, class, this is where we end our talk, okay, regarding how the CNS work. Hope you learned something, and okay, look forward for other video lectures that we have. Okay, so please take note, we'll be having a pre-test on this next meeting.